Welcome to How I Got Here, hosted by seasoned educator Jeremy Proper. This is a podcast of conversations with his former students discussing their journey from middle school to where they are today. Guests highlight their successes and the life lessons learned along the way. And now let's welcome the host, Jeremy Proper.
Welcome to How I Got Here with Mr. Proper. I will be talking to former students who will tell their story of their personal journey from Mr. Proper's class, aka Club 128, to where they are now. Everyone has a different path to get to where they are now, and that path may just be the beginning to where they actually want to be. In these podcasts, I hope to tap into the journeys that my former students have taken, for them to share their experiences with my current students, and for that matter, anyone else who is interested in seeing how hard work in and out of the classroom actually pays off. Let's welcome today's guest. Welcome to How I Got Here with Mr. Proper. I'll be talking to former students who will tell their story of their journey from Mr. Proper's class, aka Club 128, to where they are now. Everyone has a different path to get to where they are now, and that path may just be the beginning to where they actually want to be. In these podcasts, I hope to tap into the journeys that my former students have taken, for them to share their experiences with my current students, and for that matter, anyone else who is interested in seeing how hard work in and out of the classroom actually pays off.
If you like and enjoy what you're hearing, please like, subscribe, hit 5 stars, whatever you can to help us out. Thank you so much.
Let's welcome today's guest, Ian Mellul. Hey, Ian, how you doing today?
Mr. Proper, so glad to be with you.
Mr. Mellul, so glad you're here with me. I have been following you for seemingly years now, and to watch the maturation and the progression of your career and what you've chosen to do is just mind-blowing for a social studies teacher. To see someone, as I'll probably title this, from Don's house to the White House, is just incredible. So if you could just do me a favor and take some time to please explain your journey from the Don to high school to college, post-college, and what you're currently doing now.
Sure. It's funny. I'm glad you framed it that way because there are so many days where I just sit thinking, how did I get here? And, what is my journey? So framing it from the lens of from middle school to now is, not only just chronological, but helps me get my ducks in a row. And I don't know what it says about both of our ages, but
you're old. That's what it says.
I used to be able to recall more stories than I can now. And you asked me, when we were catching up before, what year did I leave Don Estridge? And I'm like, why is that answer not coming quicker to me? I'm losing credibility right at the beginning, but so obviously went to Don Estridge, and when I went there, it was the buzz of Boca. It was a new high tech school. What does that even mean? Nobody knows. What are these smart board things running around? So went to Don Estridge, had an amazing experience, and then stayed in Boca. Went to Boca High through the STEM program, and then from there went to GW, George Washington University in Washington D.C. for college. And throughout that, I majored in political science. Had various internships, and that's kind of where I realized I was interested in politics and interested in government and kind of how the U.S. government works, and had the unique opportunity to be not just finding myself in college, but figuring out what am I interested in, but with the backdrop of the White House being 4 blocks away from my freshman dorm, or Capitol Hill being several metro stops away, and just a normal college experience on the canvas of the world stage, being a very unique sort of GW experience, which I do think really informed some of my interests and my early career. And I went to GW again, a fantastic experience, and then from there I cut my teeth, like I said, with some internships. But when I graduated, I immediately joined then Secretary Hillary Clinton's campaign for president, and I traveled to, I believe, 36 states.
Wow.
With her, and traveling the country and setting up events. And I started my career in advance, which we could spend days talking about, but essentially is planning logistics and advancing the candidate before they get there. So everything from the actual stage production elements to negotiating with Secret Service and local law enforcement and local elected officials to how can the candidate get there safely and everything from the rallies, but also if they're going to have an overnight stay and the motorcades and sort of all logistical elements that go into campaigning and travel at that level. So, worked for Secretary Clinton, and then after that election, she lost to, President Trump. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I went back to DC to work on Capitol Hill for a few years. I worked for Senator Patty Murray from Washington State, and then did that for a few years. And then from there, I went to go work at a company called the Markham Group, which very similar to Advance, worked in very large events for advocacy organizations, for Democratic organizations, other presidential campaigns, things like that. And then from there is kind of how I stumbled into working for Joe Biden, when he ran for president, and then when he got inaugurated, and when he went to the White House, going to then work in the White House, for President Biden during COVID, which you and I could spend hours talking about how
Oh,
that changed the world. You started a
sure,
podcast, how the world we changed how
sure.
we communicate with each other,
Right.
and yeah, so went to the White House, and from there. I left the White House and I started my own company doing events and production and sort of the same space called Resolute Productions, and that's what I do
Nice.
now. And
Nice.
yeah, that brings us to today. So that kind of
That's amazing.
a longer answer than intended, but
No, there's nothing wrong with that. You have a massive career behind you and ahead of you already, and it's just incredible. And so many questions come to mind. The number one question I've always wanted to ask you: do you have any idea, with all those 30 plus states that you visited, did you ever track your actual flight mileage? Like, how many thousands and thousands of miles have you flown to try to accomplish all of these things?
okay, so this is a very sensitive topic you bring up because I'm sort of annoyed because nowadays there's like these apps that can
Oh,
sync between the different airlines and
right. You could
trains, and
track it
you
all.
can
Oh,
track it all. But, I can look at American Airlines and look at all my miles flown, or United or Delta, but back then, there wasn't anything that could really bridge it.
right.
I would say I'm definitely in a million miler.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
incredible.
I've traveled to 46 states, and over I want to say I have it written down somewhere. I think 34 countries is where I'm
Wow.
at.
Wow. Okay,
Yeah, so
then.
I have to check off the Dakotas. Uh,
Okay. Yes, I was just about to ask, what are the four? Because there's only four
yep,
left.
I've got to check off the Dakotas. So I have to find a reason to go back, to go to Fargo, North Dakota, and go to South Dakota, see Mount Rushmore. You're a
Yes.
historian, you'll appreciate that. So I'm excited to go see that at some point. And then where else? I've got to check off Louisiana,
Whoa.
and yep, I know, a little random. And then my last state, which I forgot also the sequence of kind of when I want to, do in what order, but it's is Idaho. So those are
Oh.
the last four on the list.
Wow. It's funny that you say Mount Rushmore because my wife and I are leaving on Saturday and we're going to Billings and Bozeman, Montana. But on the way, we're going to go, as I call them, the people heads, but we're going to Mount Rushmore. I've never been to the Dakotas either. It's another one to check off. I think I'm like 8 or 9 states total that I haven't seen. And Alaska, Hawaii, I mean, obviously, for a mainlander, I don't know when that's going to ever happen. And my wife hates to fly, so good luck with that. But yeah, it's this country is an amazing place, and the little RV that we've had is the little engine that could. We've taken it everywhere. Usually it goes to Colorado, but this summer we're going to try something new, and Montana's it. But yeah, I can't wait to see Mount Rushmore for all the history and just the architecture of that. I mean, putting that together was just unbelievable. I've seen so many shows about it, and dynamite is what made that. That's
It's
incredible.
remarkable. I can't wait to see your pictures and your videos and hear
Yeah.
that one. But no, it's just so remarkable. And I think, I think one of the biggest takeaways that I have every time I travel is, you learn so much about your own experiences when you travel to a new place, and even if that's another state in the United States, or when you're going to another country, just the things that you take for granted, and you just realize how amazing, not just how easy you have it, but how amazingly interconnected the world is when you visit other countries. And that's something I always think about when I'm traveling overseas, or when you're on another continent, just hearing how people interact with you because you're an American, and
Yes.
just how lucky and privileged you are.
Yes.
It's just something, and the other piece is every time I've traveled to a new place, you learn something new. And that sounds like a cliche and
No,
like a metaphor. And I
no.
know
If
we'll
you're
talk a little bit
open
about your
to it,
students, but yeah,
if you're open to it, you're going to receive it. And I think that's what's also well received on the other side. That
yeah,
they
100%.
genuinely see you're interested in our culture, you're interested in what we do. It's funny you say that because my wife and I, last time we went to Europe, we went to northern Italy, the Dolomite Mountains, Südtirol, that northern region, which was actually not Italian. It was German and it was actually Austrian, and they took it after World War I. And so, like, they weren't allowed to speak German for the longest time, but their food is there. And what you said was so true. The woman that we stayed in her Airbnb calls us up one day and says, "Hey, I'm sorry. I was just wondering, do you guys have any free time? My daughters really want to meet you." And we're like, "Okay, sure. What's up with that?" And she goes, "Well, my daughters speak Italian, German, but they only get to speak English 1 hour a week at school. And they want to meet, as she called it, real Americans and speak real English." And I was like, "Yeah, sure." So we went out, we took them out to lunch, and oh my God, these kids were so amazing. They were little. They were like, 9 and 7 or 7 and 5. They were little kids. And they were just so wanting to speak English with us. And then, who do you know? Where do you live? Oh, you're close to Miami. Do you see that? I'm like, the world does, like, their
It's
impression
very
is that
cool.
if you live near Miami, that you see all these famous people all the time. And I'm like, that's not really the
My
way it works.
favorite, my favorite one is going over, like if you go to Africa or sub-Saharan Africa or in Asia. If you're from Florida, it's immediately Mickey Mouse. Do you know Mickey Mouse?
Yes.
Yeah, we go way back.
Yeah, Mickey and I,
But
we've been
yeah,
pals all a lifetime. Exactly. And it's just so the connections that people have. And again, when you're so genuine, like I've always said it, food is what brings people together. And if you like someone's food, if you like food from another country, like we were saying earlier, I had a girl this year and she's Turkish, and we would talk about Turkish dishes. And she's like, "How do you know this, Mr. Proper? You're not Turkish." And I go, "Oddly enough, when I was in Scotland, I went to probably one of the greatest Turkish restaurants I've ever had." And she's like, "Really?" And she was just that the food is what brings people together. Sitting down to a meal, it breaks barriers, it does all these things. And when you're
yeah.
shown that you like it, now all of a sudden every preconceived notion is out the window because, well, you like our food, so you can't be that bad of a person, you know? And that's why you need to travel. I love traveling the United States and seeing things that I haven't seen. Like this year, I want to avoid, the mountains in Tennessee. So we're going to go through Alabama. Never been to Alabama. I've been through Alabama coming from Arizona, but I've never actually, driven through it with a purpose of going somewhere. So it's going to be interesting to see that and go to states like, we said the Dakotas. I've never been to Montana. We have so much here in the United States, and so many people just want to go to Europe, and they don't want to see our history or what we have. And it's nice to talk to people from somewhere else and get a perspective of what the world is really about, even here in America, and see how people from different states see different things. I'm sure you've seen that with your, massive amount of traveling, but it's really cool because, people are people no matter where you're from. And it's just cool to interact and see a different perspective from people. So,
Yeah, and there's nothing better too than going to a place and having a preconceived notion, however well or ill-informed it may be about the people you're going to interact with, and then them just shattering that and
totally
and and
change.
and you're like, wow, how silly was I to think that? And I'll just give you a quick example is one of my trips for the government was I went to Hiroshima, Japan,
Wow.
which is not exactly a place you as an American, not exactly a tourist destination.
No, no.
Maybe Tokyo or, but so I was there for work for the G7, and I remember thinking like, wow, how are we going to be received, an American delegation in Hiroshima?
Right.
How will the sort of connotations be about the bomb and
Right.
about Americans and about,
It's been obviously many, many years later, but the,
but
the
still,
wound
you
is
kind of
still deep.
wonder
Yeah.
how are you going to be received? And I was so overwhelmed by just how, not just how warm that the Japanese were to Americans, but just how how much they've learned from the World War II in a positive way that I think every American, I think every young person that studies World War II should have to go there to have to see, look, guys, this is a painful topic. This is a horrible topic. Here's what a nuclear weapon can do. But peace is important. And, you go to they call it the Peace Museum. And they have every right. They could call it the American Nuclear Bomb Museum. They could
Right,
really,
right.
they have every reason to be upset.
Of course.
But no, it's about peace, and it's about prosperity and bringing folks together and learning from each other's differences. And I'll never forget. I met one of the last survivors of the nuclear bomb.
Wow.
She's in her 90s, and
Yeah.
she gave me a big hug, and I'll never forget the interaction when you meet people like that who have every right to feel hatred in their heart but
Yes.
have nothing but love. It just makes you think, that should be the cure to racism, right? Bringing
Yeah.
people who are closed-minded to places like that to learn and to experience people who have nothing but positivity to share. Anyway, sorry for the tangent, but
No,
just as you're talking about
that's
travel, it's kind of all what it's about,
it's
right?
it's all intertwined. It's learning people's cultures, eating their food, learning what they want, and they want to tell you, especially when you show an interest. It makes such a huge difference.
Yeah.
And that's the experiences that we carry with us for a lifetime. I remember, like you said something that's really interesting. I've stopped having expectations. Literally, I don't have any anymore. Why? Because they're never met. Your expectations are always way too high, and reality is never going to match that. And I've stopped doing it because, I just want to experience it when I get there and not be like, oh, well, I thought it was going to be this. I thought it was going to be better. And it's just made my life so much better. My wife just asked me that yesterday. What are you expecting out of this trip? I'm like, safe. That we get there without any problems. I don't know. I've wanted to see Mount Rushmore my whole life. To be honest, I never even thought I'd go see it. And now it's on the itinerary. So I just want to go there without preconceived notions. I know it's a huge history thing for me. But on the other hand, I don't want it to be ruined if, I don't know. You've been to the Louvre in Paris. Have you seen the Mona Lisa? It's a little bit let downish when you see it for the first time because everywhere in America, it's blown up to in huge proportions, and it's this tiny little portrait. So it's I've just learned it's easier to just go in with blank slate. It is what it's going to be. And like you said, people wind up surprising you. You give people a chance and you never know what's going to happen. You never know how it's going to turn out. So I like to have low expectations because I'm never let down.
No, I think that's a great approach.
But again, it comes with age. It's like, when you were a kid, you little kid, you loved New Year's Eve because you got to stay up past midnight and bang the pots and pans or whatever your parents allowed you to do at midnight. And then as you get older, you're kind of like, yeah, this kind of stinks. Or if you're by yourself on New Year's, you don't have anybody to smooch it up with or whatever the case may be. And then as you get older, you're just kind of like, when I don't have expectations, things seem to go a little bit better. So
Yeah.
as I always ask, how did Ian get inspired for learning? What was that moment? Was there someone, a person, a grandma, a grandpa, a mom, a dad, even a sister? Was there someone that really you were like, that's interesting. I want to figure that out?
Yeah. I mean, I was thinking about this earlier. Education in academia, it's one of those things where it's a good metaphor for life. Like there is, I think the sooner you realize that there's always going to be somebody who is smarter than you, whether it be naturally,
Yep.
or maybe somebody who's not smarter than you, but somebody who's going to outwork you.
Hold on a
And,
sec. I need to interrupt that thought. How old
please.
was Ian when he figured this unbelievably mature idea out? Like, how old were you when you figured this out?
I actually can remember it exactly, and it was at Don Estridge, believe it
No
or not.
way.
And yeah, I'll tell you, because I was sitting in math class, and my teacher was this redneck guy named Billy Jack Guerin, and
Billy!
I thought to myself, what am I going to learn from this guy who doesn't talk like me? Here I am, a little 12-year-old boy from Boca Raton, and I've got this teacher with a big Southern draw, and but I'll never forget, he was Mr. Proper. He was so excited.
Yeah.
Um,
He loved math.
Technology and loved
Oh my
math.
God.
And there were,
Technology was his jam.
yeah, and like I think it was the first year they had the smart boards and like the
Yep.
smart projector things, and I
Yep.
just remember like he was so excited about, and this was back when you could use like digital imaging was new and all these things,
Right.
how to inject technology into sort of the educational apparatus, and I remember he was so excited to teach, and he said, in a Southern twang, he was like, Ian, you're pretty good at math, but you're not better than me. I remember
Ha,
thinking like, yeah, obviously I'm 12 and you're the teacher, so you're going to be
right,
better. And
right.
I did have this moment of like, yeah, like there's always going to be
Clarity.
somebody smarter in the room. Yeah. And like, so I've got to really work hard at this to like make sure I keep learning. And so I don't think it was a light bulb of like, oh, I'm inspired to love education in like a more explicit sense. But I think there was this implicit realization because, Mr. Guerin back then, he talked about, how competitive things were going to get from here. And he's like, you guys have it easy. You've got this great school with all this technology. But I remember he used to do this sort of whataboutism, back when teachers would say, I used to, walk to school uphill in the rain.
Yes,
There's no bus.
both
So,
ways.
but he would sort of talk about when he was in school and how much harder it was. And I don't think I understood it as clearly, but certainly as time has gone on, I thought,
You do.
wow,
Yeah.
how lucky I am. And I've really got to work hard because if not, there's going to be somebody else to take my spot here. And
Right.
that's just something that
Nice.
whether or not that's super clear in middle school, it gets more clear in high school or in college when you're trying to apply and get into a program, or when you apply to a job and you realize there's thousands of people who want that interview, and it just becomes more and more clear, I think, with time.
Sure. And for those of you that might not know this, when Ian went to the school, Don Estridge was literally the paramount school for technology. We were the apex. We had better technology than any school in the county of Palm Beach. And when we had smart boards and we had the clickers to take tests and we had all this cool technology, no other school in the county had it. So we were kind of the test bunny. And then when it worked out for us and our scores went through the roof, every place in Palm Beach County had it. I mean, we even had technology that never came to fruition where we had like hand scanners where they were supposed to sign in science class and you put your hand in there. I had an electric swipe badge for my door where I just would swipe my badge on the door and it opened the door. I didn't have to use a key. I mean, there were all kinds of technologies which are almost antiquated now thinking about it. Whereas back then, this was like cutting edge,
Yeah,
and
I said we sound so old talking about innovative smart boards, and everyone has all these
yes,
kids have iPads in their bag. It's like, okay.
exactly. Exactly. The kids didn't even have their own computer. Now everyone has their own computer. And it's just interesting.
Remember that, like one of the brochure items of like how cool Don Estridge was like your student will have access to a
Right.
computer.
Right.
And there was like one for like 50 of us, and now every kid has an iPad and a computer. That's awesome.
Exactly.
But
But
no,
again,
the technology, it matters. It changes the way you interact with the material, and you
yeah.
get excited about things.
Yeah,
When
exactly.
tests feel like a video game when you're using a clicker, like that's kind of cool.
Right. And anything to draw the buy-in, like even the games now, since the kids are all addicted to video games like it's kitty crack, now all of a sudden they're like want to play these educational games because they can build their avatar and then they get to play in this fantasy world and this is their life. And it's so funny because as much as they want to be older kids, like the last week of school, the kids are like, hey, Mr. Proper, would you mind if I brought in my Switch? And I'm like, it's the last week of school. Go right ahead. And another kid, hey, Mr. Proper, do you mind if I know it's not a Switch, but do you mind if I bring in my gaming station? I'm like, how does it connect? Oh, through an HDMI. I'm like, yeah, you can just throw it in the camera. And they're looking at me like, you're okay with this? I'm like, it's the last week of school. We're not doing anything. Have fun. Have at it. And to watch their faces light up because they're playing games. I mean, obviously, I have to monitor what they're playing, but I'm like, look, you can't play any death, kill games, but anything else like driving games or whatever. And just to see them in their own, I don't want to say natural habitat, but their own world is so interesting to me because like, let's go to me. I had Atari, okay? The graphics were trash, the games were awful, and then don't even get me started on that joystick that like gave me the biggest callus on my hand. And now they're playing video games which were better than the cartoons that I used to watch. So it all comes full circle, but whatever gets you motivated. And the technology I think really did it and got a lot of kids your age to come to the school because you always need a hook and a catch, and we were still pretty new when Ian came to Don Estridge. So was there another teacher who actually made the light bulb turn on besides Mr. Guerin? Because I remember you were talking about somebody from high school who was the one who was kind of the precursor pushing you towards G-Dub.
Yeah, I mean, and I'll get to that in a second. But thinking of like other teachers, I do remember there was this kind of tall, loud guy in the hallways, always sort of wearing a Devils jersey, giving students high fives. And I remember like being a sixth and seventh grader thinking, who is this absolute sociopath of a teacher just giving every student, that goes here high fives? And why does it always sound like his classroom is a football stadium? Like, what the heck is going on in there? I remember I would always try to I don't remember like the doors or probably have changed, 20 years later, but there's like a little glass window where you kind of see
Yep.
what's going on, but not really.
Yep.
And there was always there was always a ruckus. Like kids were running around having fun. And I'm like, how is that a civics class? Like, what are they doing in there? So I don't know. I remember even before having you as a teacher, the idea of, oh, Mr. Proper is more closer to a friend than a teacher, or he's both. You get to hang out with Mr. Proper. And hearing the way people were talking about going to your class was exciting. So I do remember, then I finally remember, okay, now I've got this guy as a teacher. Let's see what all the hype is about. And I'll never forget. I don't remember what the project was, but I remember there was some kind of like American history project. It was like a big final component, and you had to pick a character and do not a book report, but like 10 times cooler.
It was the American Revolutionary War project.
Yes, and I'll never forget. I don't think I nailed it per se, but I got really into the theatrics of it, the production of it, And I remember I dressed up and I had the props and this and that.
You dressed up.
And
I remember
and
that.
I remember I didn't think I did a great job, but you gave me an A. And I remember I came up to you and I was like, Mr. Proper, are you sure? Like, I don't think I really deserve
You're questioning my grading. Like,
I did.
What kid complains about getting an A?
I really should have just shut up and taken an A. But I remember I was like, how did this go so well? And I don't remember exactly what you said, but I remember the sentiment, which is you were like, look, no one else brought props. Nobody else dressed up as crazily as you did. And you were like, showing up matters and putting yourself out there, that matters. That takes guts. And I remember thinking, wow, a teacher is going to give me credit for guts and for putting yourself out there. And I'll be honest, that's not something that you really get in life in a traditional academic setting because, you don't really get rewarded. There's no bell curve for having guts. There's no bell curve for putting yourself out there. But here I am, 12, 13 years old, and you're being rewarded for putting yourself out there. And I think that was a moment for me when I remembered, okay, trying matters. And even if you're going to fail, or maybe you didn't think you did as great of a job as you, wanted to do or needed to do, trying is, 90% of the battle, just showing up. I think a lot about, not to get too serious, but I think a lot about Maya Angelou. And I don't remember every lesson from your class, but that famous quote, of people, they're going to forget what you said, they're going to forget what you did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. And I remember being able to show up to school, being able to show up in a way where you weren't scared to maybe say the wrong thing or scared to fail. And that's such an important sentiment when you get to, now I get into high school and there's thousands of students who are going to compete against,
competition,
and it's scary and intense. But knowing that, it's okay to mess up or it's okay to not have all the right answers, that's the kind of thing that sticks with you,
Well, it's hard to believe, but I'm speechless.
That is hard to believe. Mr. Proper being speechless is hard to believe.
I am the worst person at taking compliments, and you have just bestowed me one of the best compliments I've ever gotten, and I can't thank you enough because that's basically the crux of what I do. I took everything I pretty much learned in graduate school for education, and I threw it out the window because I realized for me, it didn't work. And I tell the kids all the time, the day I stop having fun being in the classroom is the day I stop being a teacher. I said, I come here to have a good time. It's my room. It's my rules. But we want to have a good time because that rote and routine, it's just boring. The kids don't like it. I'm studying 300, 400, 500-year-old dead people. No one cares. You have to make it interesting. And it's funny because I tell this story to my kids every year from the moment that it happened. Way back in Miami when SpongeBob first came on the air, I had no idea what it was. And I was getting ready for work. And in South Miami Middle School, it started at 8:15. So I had to be up much earlier. And I was watching SportsCenter as I normally do to see the sports scores and what happened last night. Because when you have to get up that early, you can't stay up and watch the LA Laker game that ends at 1 o'clock in the morning. So all of a sudden I go to sit down and I sit down on the old recording device, the TiVo, which I don't even know if my listeners know what that is. It was the original DVR. And all of a sudden the channel changes and SpongeBob comes on. Never saw it before. And it's right at the beginning when the song starts. And I'm like, what is this? And I rewound it, listened to it about 3 or 4 times. I wrote down all the words. And then I went to school. And first period, for no apparent reason, I memorized it. I just start singing the song. Are you ready, kids? One kid is like, I can't. Like, he has no idea what's going on. And everybody in the room is like, what is happening? And I'm like, I can't hear you. And I just start doing the whole song. And by the end of the song, everyone's singing, SpongeBob SquarePants. And all of a sudden it ends. And the assistant principal rips the door open and it's like, what's going on in here? And I'm like, it's my warm up. The kids are ready to learn. And they're all just sitting there attentive, waiting to see what craziness happens next. And that's how you get kids to buy in. You do dumb things. You're not afraid to embarrass yourself. At this point in my life, I've embarrassed myself almost every single day. So if I can embarrass myself in front of a bunch of 12, 13, and 14-year-olds and they're enjoying having school and coming to my class and not like, oh, you never want to hear in the hallway, oh, crap, I got Proper's class. Like, that's not what you want to hear. I want to hear other people's names coming out of people's mouths.
Also, these days, these young people, the amount of social pressures that exist, there's with the TikTok and
Yep.
Instagram, and they all have these devices, and there's the online bullying, and not even explicit online bullying, also like just the judgment of, oh, I gotta have the outfits. And I saw on TikTok the other day, there was a young person, I think a young teenager, that was like a makeup influencer. I'm thinking, how do these young people even know, what to buy, let alone using makeup or anything like that? So you think about all the pressures that exist on these folks, but to be able to turn that off for 45 minutes a day, an hour a day, and be silly and not be judged and not have a chat GPT telling you all the answers to the world, as a 13-year-old, just being able to listen and enjoy yourself, that stuff, it matters, and I think it's very, especially in those informative years when you're so impressionable, 12, 13 years old, just knowing that, it's okay to be different. It's okay to have fun. That matters. And I think, and I'm sure as you've done this podcast, you've heard from students who maybe they weren't the most outgoing
Right.
when they were in your class, but
Right.
it impacts them the same, whether or not they were singing the SpongeBob song back to you or not,
Right.
seeing that was okay to be, to be expressive or to be emotive, it has an impact on people.
It really does. I mean, there's countless stories. There's another one that comes to mind. I had this kid who was very shy, didn't have a lot of friends. One day out of the blue, he writes me an email and he's like, hey, Mr. Proper, I just wanted to give you a check-in and thank you for everything that you did. And I'm like, everything that I did? What are you talking about? Like, you were so quiet in my class. Like, I'm reading. Like, I don't even understand. And he goes, I was really quiet, shy, didn't have a lot of friends, didn't have a girlfriend. And he goes, when I went to high school, I just remember seeing, I can't believe he compared me to this, but he goes, I remember seeing the WWJD bracelet. What would Jesus do? And he goes, I just decided to replace the Jesus with Proper. He could have done Jeremy because that's my first name, because then it's still J, but he went with Proper. And he goes, I just decided to live my life the way I see you. And I'm like, what? And that worked? And he's like, yeah. All of a sudden, I started to be more outgoing and I started to get more friends. And then before you knew it, I actually had my first girlfriend. And all of a sudden, my life turned around. I'm reading this and I'm crying. And I'm like, really? Someone used my life as their roadmap and it worked? Holy crap. I thought I was the only person that did that. And these, like you said, until you get these emails, you don't know what changes that you've made on these kids or, something new I tried doing this year. It just out of the blue. I had this one girl who I don't even remember at this point what it was, but because she's done so many amazing things. And I just said on a Friday, you know what? I'm writing this girl's mom a nice email. And this was a good kid. This is not a troublemaker. This isn't like I'm trying to do something. All I wanted to do was throw out some niceties. The email I got from her mother, she was just like over the moon. Oh my God, my daughter loves your class. She talks about it every night at dinner. You're her favorite teacher, blah. And it's like, I wasn't looking for the compliments. I was just sending out the friendly niceness because your daughter is such an amazing kid. And then all of a sudden I had this epiphany. Every Friday, I picked a new kid. And every Friday, I wrote an email to a kid. And then I picked something that I haven't done in a really long time. I took a kid that wasn't such a great kid and kind of a problem, and I wrote his mom the same email. And she literally typed, I am crying right now as I write this. I have never gotten this kind of email about my son. Thank you so much for seeing everything that I see in him that nobody else will. And I was like, Greatest compliment ever. You don't realize what's going on the other side. You don't realize what kind of life someone has outside of school. You don't realize how good, bad, whatever it is. And like you said, now you add in TikTok and Instagram and bullying, and it doesn't have to be, horrible, but still, like people say mean things all the time. People say mean things on my Instagram, and thank God I have good friends who come back and defend me. But no one likes bad. Everyone likes good. And if you can promote the good in life, then positive things happen. Of course, we all have bad days. I'm mad, but I show it and everybody knows it. But it's not every day. I literally had a girl this year write me a note going, I know we weren't the greatest class that you've had yet this year, but I hope you can get over it soon and we can go back to the way things were because I really love your class. And I'm like, how can I stay mad at someone when they write a note like that?
Yeah.
But again, like people always ask me, Mr. Proper, how come Mr. or Mrs. So-and-so can't be this way? And I said, be what way? And they're like you. And I go, look, this is just who I am. This is what I've turned into. You guys are young. You're impressionable. Plus, I teach social studies, okay? Most people aren't taking this to the Ian Mellul extent. Most people are doing math or science, STEM, whatever it may be. And this is where we can have fun. I've had so many of the math teachers go, I'm so grateful for you. And I'm like, why? What do I do? You get to have fun with the kids. You get to talk about life. You get to talk about like, oh my God, this year we went so deep into the stock market. I'm talking about puts and calls and all these different things. And the kids are just eating it up. Like 2 years ago, I had 5 kids in one class that they all had their own Robinhood account. And they're like, Props, what are you looking at these days? I'm like, what I'm looking at, you can't afford. And they're like, okay, what's cheap? And then but it was just so nice to give it that break. And then I call up on the big screen, a stock, and I'm like, this is this is that. Or this year I picked a couple of good ones that I bought at $3 or $4 that went all the way up to 50. And the kids are like, how did you know? I go, it's just luck and happenstance. You do research. That's the one thing that history taught me, how to do research. Research is research. It doesn't matter what the core topic is, but if you know how to find things, it's just going to make your life so much easier. I'm sure you learned that in your degree while looking up all the stuff, and then all of your jobs are just research based, I would assume.
Yeah, and in government, too, there's so many acronyms and terms,
Oh my God,
and
it must be
every
insane.
day you heard things that you have no idea what the person next to you said, but you don't, you're sitting next to a 3-star general, you don't want to sound like an idiot, so you just say, yes, sir, and then
Look it up.
Google it or look it up, and oh, that's what that means, or oh, that's what this means, and yeah, I mean, it's a great old idiom, but you fake it until you make it, and
Yes, without a doubt.
and also, but then with a healthy dose of you, you can't if you can no longer fake it and you're in a setting where if you don't know what something means, you can also say, hey, by the way, what was that term you said? Oh, like that's what that meant. Okay, great. Because I did have thoughts on that, but I was I didn't want to say anything because I'm not sure that was what we were talking about. So it's
Right.
also the healthy dose of knowing when to don't be scared to say I have no
You're
idea
like,
on
yeah,
God's green earth what you're saying right now, and that too is like sometimes terms or acronyms can be barriers to entry to um, folks that have an opinion because maybe they didn't know what exactly that abbreviation was, or so just remembering too when you're in these group team settings. Anytime when I'm leading a team, I want to make sure, hey guys, when I say this is what that means, or this is what this
right.
term is referring to, because you want to make sure you're not you have to bring along everyone for the ride, and you want to make sure you're not
Sure.
leaving people
It's
behind.
almost like they
Um,
should give out cheat sheets when you show up. Like, okay, SLC means this, and you're like, oh, okay. Because if, like you said, if you're sitting down with a 3-star general, he's going to be using terms you have no idea because
of course.
you didn't do military service, and this isn't
Exactly, right.
not your area of expertise, but yet you're expected to know it. It's like whoa, whoa, whoa. So
And
that's a
and
really good
that's the
point.
secret. For the young people listening, here's the secret. You're not always expected to know it. If anything, you're expected to be honest when you don't, and to say,
Yeah,
I'm here to learn. Oh, that's not, thank you for teaching. Who to your point exactly. Like, no, I haven't served in the military, but and when you're sitting across from someone that is, or someone that has served or is serving, learning from their incredible selfless experience and from what they do, it's a remarkable opportunity. So you're not expected to have the exact same perspective on life or
Right.
experiences, but you're expected to respect it and to raise your hand when you say, "Hey, would you mind explaining that one more time, just so I can better understand that?" So I
Right.
think that's a
Yeah.
hidden secret too.
I like that a lot. But the key component you said was knowing the right moment to do it. Like you have to
Right.
understand, I should know that. So if I raise my hand, I look like an idiot. I don't know that. Okay, I'm fine. It's oh my gosh. And it's so funny because now that I've had a little time to process your unbelievable compliments, it reminds me of another group of kids that we were doing another project, and the kids come up to me and they're like, they're all like juniors or seniors in college now. And they were like, "Hey, Mr. Proper, can we do something different?" And I'm like, "I'm listening. You had me at different. I'm intrigued." And they're like, "Well, we were thinking about, instead of, making a poster project, could we like make up a song?" And I was like, "I'm listening." And they're like, "We're going to make up a song that deals with all of this information, and then we're going to present it to the whole class." And I was like, "Sounds good, but it better be good. I'm putting my trust in you that it's not going to be the happy slapstick song and it's going to be funny and fun, and what? No, no, we promise." They come in. "Oh, yeah, by the way, Mr. Proper, we decided that we had some time over the weekend and we put it to music and we brought in our ukuleles. Do you mind if we play these?" And I'm like, "Are you kidding me? What?" And I'm already like, I didn't even hear the song. And I'm like, they spent time making a song. They spent time putting it to music, and they learned how to sing the song. And they got up in front of a bunch of eighth graders and sang this song. And I was like,
Talk
this is the
about
most,
courage.
yes. I'm like, this is the most incredible thing. And of course, there's always the naysayers in the audience. "Oh, that's terrible. You guys suck, blah, blah, blah." And I'm like, you get up here and sing a song that you just wrote and sing in front of a whole bunch of eighth graders. I'm like, no, 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 no. And that's the other thing. Like, I think the kids also appreciate me because I'm the protector of the people who possibly go out of their comfort zone but aren't strong enough to stand up for themselves when, of course, the meanie heads show up. And I'm like, no, 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 no. You are not making fun of these kids. These kids put themselves on the spot, and this is amazing. But that's it. Like I said, I bend as far as I can, and I do whatever I can so these kids can have the best experience possible. And again, like you said, I had a kid who was at FAU, or maybe it was Lynn, and they were just doing their observations for teaching. And after the period ends, she takes me aside and she's like, "How do I do that?" And I'm like, "How do you do what?" She's like, "How do I do what you do?" And I'm like, hate to tell you, you can't. And she's like, "What do you mean?" I go, I can't teach this to people. This is just inherently who I am. This is me as a person. And I look at it this way, Ian. I'm kind of a comedian who has 5 shows a day for 55 minutes a piece. And I've just been honing this skill over and over and over. It's kind of like Groundhog Day with Bill Murray. It's just different people every year. And that's the positive, because I get to tell the same jokes and they have never heard them before. So they're like, "Oh, these are great. These are funny." But I want to be better. Like, I can't tell you how many times I'm in the middle of a lesson and I just scrap it. I'm like, "This sucks. We're going to do something else." And the kids are like, "You can do that?" I'm like, "I'm the teacher. I can do whatever I want." And they're like, "But how come our other teachers just plow right through it?" I said, "Because they don't have anything else. I have 20 plus years of lesson plans in my computer that I have 10 of the exact same thing, just done in it's the exact same historical thing, but it's done in a different perspective in a different way." Just like I am ashamed to the art community because my mom went to FIT in New York City, Fashion Institute of Technology, and she can paint and draw and sculpt and da 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 da. And meanwhile, like, I draw stick figures on the board. I'm sure you remember my crappy drawings, but I can take pictures. And I let the kids, if you like, one year I had a girl who was like Mr. Green's best artist ever. And she's like, "Mr. Robert, I really don't feel like writing this essay. Can I draw a picture of it?" And I said, "Can I see your portfolio?" She brought it in. She showed me. And I was like, "Okay." And then another kid's like, "Well, I want to draw a picture." I go, "This girl is in like advanced art in 8th grade and has taken it for 3 years. You want to see her portfolio? She's not drawing stick figures." And sure enough, I still have the poster. It's in my classroom. And it's just unbelievable. But I think you have to be willing to bend to what other people's talents are. And that's when you get the most out of people. Not pigeonholed like, "Well, you must do the math this way." But my father showed me this and it's easier. Why do I have to do it that way? Look, you get the right answer, you get the right answer. And by letting kids be creative, I think eighth grade, maybe you can tell me because you probably were in high school more recently than I was, but eighth grade is the last bastion of being able to be whoever you are and not have to be so like, oh, rote routine. I have to study. I have these AP exams. I have this. I have that. Middle school still affords you that time to be a kid, and it's not so real and it's not so in your face. And I try to feed on that because A, it's their last year. I want them to have a good experience. I want them to remember. And, you do what you do to help the kids out, but not everybody has that ability or wants to give the keys to the car to the kids in the class.
No, absolutely. I think understanding and recognizing that not every student is going to fit the same mold, or set of expectations, and knowing that, hey, to break through to certain folks, we're going to have to change the rules a little bit, to get them to show up. Because I guarantee you, had you not said yes to that, that artist, that young student that with the drawing, they maybe they would have disengaged or not have
Right.
gotten something out of the class that I'm sure you got out of too. And I'm sure it was mutually beneficial, not only just for her classmates, but also for that student too, to be able to be expressive and still learn history and whatever the core sort of meat of that project was. But
Right.
that stuff matters and has an impact.
Well, letting them guide their own bus and go in their direction, but still doing it the way you want. But not everybody's willing to do that. They don't want to give up control. I mean, I'm constantly in the principal's office and they're like, why can't people be more like you? I'm like, what are you talking about? More like me? They're like, yeah, just water off a duck's back, just letting it go. You don't have to be the jerk all the time and you don't always have to win. And I'm like, everybody's different. You're at a different point in your career. You're trying to accomplish different things, but this is the path of least resistance and it works. But how is that least resistance? I'm giving you the keys to the car. Just don't wrap it around a telephone pole. Sometimes I gave a kid a Ferrari and they should be driving a golf cart, but go have at it, and if it crashes and burns, you better have a backup plan. Don't come to me on Monday and it's due and go, well, that didn't work out so well. So what should I do next? So speaking of this, if Ian could go back in time and tell his eighth grade self some kind of advice, what would you tell him? And would you listen?
I'm not sure if I would listen.
I wouldn't.
When you're 13, you're like, I know it all. I think we've kind of touched on this a little bit, but I think just this notion that it might look and it might feel like people around you, other eighth graders, it might feel like they know what they're doing and it might feel like they've got it all figured out, but the real secret is they don't. Or maybe they do, but they have no idea, how their world might change when they get to high school or college, circumstances for better or worse. And to those eighth graders who, are in your class now and who are watching this, who are thinking, yeah, I have no idea what I want to do, next year, let alone this summer or college or beyond that. That is not only is that perfectly normal, but that's such a widely felt thing that happens to young people because and happened to me too. That I wanted to. I had no idea that I wanted to go into politics. I had no idea that I wanted to go to school in DC. I didn't even know what I was going to do the summer of eighth grade year. So I think that's the sort of biggest thing I would try to scream at myself, which is it's going to be okay. Keep doing what you're doing. And, the one thing, control what you can control, which is I talked a little bit earlier about, there's always going to be somebody smarter or who has more money than you or whatever.
Right.
But the one thing you can control is you can control that there's no one that's going to outwork you. There's nobody that's going to put in the time to learn, the time to try new experiences, the not be guided by fear and indecision and letting the inner demons win of, oh, I'm not going to try this because I might fail. Make sure that nobody outworks you. And that's how I've tried to live every day, which is I might not be the smartest person in the room, but I'm going to work harder than anybody in the same room as me. And I've taken that to many different countries. I've taken that to when I have briefed world leaders. I've taken that to working with CEOs. And I think knowing that you're going to, Ian's going to be the person that's going to put in the work. And when Ian says hey guys, I've got this,
He
my word
does.
as my bond. Yeah, they're not going to worry that ball's going to get dropped because I haven't given them any reason to think that.
And that's an amazing way to live. You can't outwork me. Again, like you said, I may have not been selected to go to Harvard or Yale or Princeton or MIT or any of those prestigious universities. But you know what? You have a quality that everyone wishes they had. That stick to itiveness, that hard working, that nose to the grindstone. I'm gonna get it done. The fact that you don't want to let anyone down because you're letting yourself down first. That is an incredible thing. And thank you for sharing that. It's just so unbelievable. So going along with that, what was your most challenging educational experience and how did you overcome that challenge? Was there something that sticks out that was like, oh man, I'm just not good at this? And then somehow you were able to work your way around it?
Well, when you think about like the teachers that have had a huge and sort of profound impact on, my educational journey and I'm sure for you it's the same way. You also think about some of those roadblocks and what were the teachers that you couldn't win over. And I think back to GW and I'll never forget I had to take an elective in sort of the social science space and and there's only so many courses that fit that requirement for the degree. And there was a professor named Dr. Vanessa Gamble, and the class was on black women in the medical field. A really niche, incredible course,
Yeah,
talking about just how much harder it is
sure.
for not just women of color, but women in the medical field, and specifically the African American experience. And just a remarkable course. But I'll tell you, Dr. Gamble is a tough cookie, and let me tell you, she runs her class like she runs, I'm sure, her emergency medicine department. She doesn't mess around, and I'll never
No.
forget. If you missed class, you went down a letter grade.
Oh my
I was
God.
I was a senior at GW. I'd already completed my White House internship. I was doing advance for then Vice President Biden and Mrs. Obama. I was balancing school, but also traveling the world with
Right. And
these
you're like, this
figures, and
class is going to hold me down? I don't think
I'm like,
so.
oh God, what am I going to do here? And my charm had, when I say zero effect, I mean Dr. Gamble.
Negative.
This is someone who's been in been in an operating room. She didn't care that oh great, you work at the White House, cool kid, don't miss class. So I'll never forget. I went to the dean. I went to Dr. Peter Komorski, and I was like, he was very supportive of the work I was doing. And I said, Dr. K, like, what am I going to do? Like, Dr. Gamble just doesn't care that I'm going to be missing some class to go on these advanced trips for the White House. And he was like, oh, I'll send her an email. I'll send
Right.
her a note. And
I'll
the
try to
dean was
help.
very supportive. And yeah, I'll see what I can do. And, so I'll never forget the next week I went into class, like, here we go. And I went up to Dr. Gamble after class and I was like, hey, did Dr. Komorski send you a note? And she was like, yes, he did. And I was like, and
And then you hear in the
anything?
background, dum, dum,
And
dum, dum, dum.
yeah, like the soundtrack was like, good try, kid. And I'll never forget, she was like, I'm glad the dean is supportive of your activities, but, and I said, oh, has anything changed? And
Yeah.
Dr. Gamble looked at me and said, refer back to the syllabus. And I was like, oh God, this is
Oh,
not going well. And,
ouch.
long story short, I was trying to get on one specific trip. It was a very cool opportunity to go to the Middle East with Mrs. Obama on an advanced
Wow.
trip. And I didn't tell her who it was for.
Right, right. You don't want to name drop or
And
like put it out
no,
there,
yeah,
right?
right. I wasn't trying to get special privileges. I was trying to, take advantage of this amazing opportunity that I had.
Right. Didn't want to
And
miss it.
I said, I was like, look, I'll just have to get back to Mrs. Obama's office and tell him the truth that I just can't make it work. And she looked at me and she was like, you're not lying to me, right? And I said, no. I said, ma'am, I'm supposed to go on this trip for Mrs. Obama to do this. She's doing a Let Girls Learn initiative and trying to
Oh
help
boy.
young girls go to and she said, I'll never forget. She was like, I don't make exceptions, so we can't just let you do this. No, but she said, this initiative that you're doing is about, specifically, young girls and black girls and education. And she was like, why don't you write your paper on that and what you've learned and how that initiative and what you've learned on the trip? And I'll never forget. So I don't know if she made an exception, but similar to how you teach your kids, she figured out a way to bring
Work
me to the
around.
table. And
Yeah.
yes, it was a loophole.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget, I was able to tie in what I learned on this trip. She still docked me half a letter grade, to be very clear. But that's okay. That's okay because I was still able to go on this trip, and I was able to go to the Middle East and
Right.
places Obama and
Right.
learn a lot.
You did what you
And
needed, and she kind of gave you a pseudo pass.
and I honestly, to this day, I have so much respect for her. She didn't care, even if that was Mrs. Obama. She didn't care. She wasn't impressed. She is
Wow.
someone who did the hard work. And if anything, that was such a microcosm of what she was teaching, which is, as a black woman, she's had to go through such incredible obstacles to get to her
Right.
position, and
Sure.
here is this young white kid from Boca trying to get exception to the rules.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
I'll never forget how much respect I learned for her and I had for her in that moment of, the syllabus applies to everyone. And, even not just because she did bend the rules, but because she really made me earn it. Going to the dean didn't move the
Right.
needle. Really,
No.
I had to plead my case and really articulate it in a way. And I hadn't ever struggled with communication in that way before. And I really had to make the case. And not just because it worked, but just I'll never forget her principles. She's
Yeah.
still teaching at GW and is a university
That's
tenured
awesome.
professor and still not taking crap from anybody.
No,
So
of course not. But what I love the fact was you didn't name drop right off the bat. You weren't like, well, I have to go to Africa with Mrs.
sure.
Obama and, I can't miss this trip. And, here's this African American woman and the first African American first lady. And, you use that as your last final straw because you really wanted to do this. But you were able to do it in a way that it was, like you said, it was a workaround. She has high principles. She wants to show everyone you're not getting special treatment. And you did get to do it, but it also correlated into the curriculum and what you were doing. So it wasn't like you were going to Disney with this woman. It was like, I need
No,
to
and look,
make sure I'm
I
taking care
still,
of the kids while we're at
and
Disney.
yeah,
So,
and to the letter of the law, I got docked the letter grade or whatever
right,
it was, but I
right.
still was able to learn and go and make up the assignment. And so it was a very amazing experience and
But
very so.
here's
But it was
the,
a challenge. It was yeah.
yeah, but here's the thing. She sets you up for success. But like you said 5 minutes ago, you have an unbelievable work ethic, and you showed that to her that, look, I want to do this. How can we correlate it into the classroom experience and make this the project? And she was more than willing to bend, like I said, to the rules, which are hers, but you still got to do it. It wasn't,
And I think the big life lesson for me to take away was I was trying to politic it. I went to the dean meeting and
yes,
I was like, I've got the
yes,
dean, and this was a tenured professor. I mean, she
right.
didn't care about that. But when I finally spoke to her like an adult and I pled my case and I had the facts and I said, look, here's what I'm trying to do and here's why I'm trying to do it. I think she respected me for more for that.
Right.
And
Right.
I'm so grateful that not just that she said no, but that I learned that you're not always going to get your way. Oftentimes in life, you're not going to get your way. And learning how to, articulate yourself in a respectful way, even when told no, especially when told no, is a huge part of learning that, who you are as a person.
Of course, because it's growth, it's maturity. Young you would have been pissed off and, this is awful. Older you went, okay, how can we work this? How can we make this happen? I want to do this. She doesn't want me to, but I'm going to use my words. And then you said something else of maturity where you went to her. You didn't just wait for the dean to make it all nice and work out. You went to her, probably with your tail between your legs, knowing she was not the easiest and she was a principled person. And therefore, you were just like, hey, this is my case. This is all that I'm going to do. Let me see what happens. And sure enough, it worked out. That's incredible.
Yeah, just the honest truth with no frills was all I needed, and
And it
that's
worked.
yeah,
Yeah, no tricks, no nothing pulling out of the bag.
exactly.
So, with all of this, I mean, you've barely scratched the surface. I could only imagine with all the things that you've done. This could be like a 10-hour podcast with all the people you've met, the places you've gone. The one thing I really want to know is with this hectic, I mean, that's in my opinion mild. I don't even know what word to use. With this hectic schedule, what was downtime, me time for Ian? Like, what is it that you enjoy that gets you away from this that you're like, okay, this is going to help me recharge? Like, what's downtime for you?
I think, you know, I took the lesson, one of the lessons I think that you taught or you still teach every day in your classroom, which is um, taking the work incredibly seriously. Like it's a very serious work. It's the U.S. government. This is the White House, and showing up every day to do a really important job and do it to the best of your ability for the American people. So I've taken that sort of heuristical approach to every job that I've had in my career, which is taking the work very, very seriously. But here's the important caveat: not taking myself seriously. Like showing up to do the job, but maybe when it's appropriate, being able to unwind and to have fun with your colleagues and to enjoy the people that enjoy the time spent with the people that you're working with. And in my line of work, there's a lot of long hours and a lot of long travel. So sometimes all the downtime you get is on a 12-hour cargo transport plane, and to Asia, or on a layover in Europe between connecting flights, and just treating people the way you want to be treated, but also just being able to be authentically yourself, and respecting folks and meeting them where they are. It really matters. And I think, to your question about downtime, when you're doing something that you love, it doesn't really always feel like work, even if you're working 24 hours a day, or, it feels like that rather,
Right,
not to be
right.
hyperbolic. But, so when you do have that limited downtime that you do have, it's just trying to enjoy it in even if it's just, hey, having a working lunch where
Right.
you might have both your AirPods in on a Zoom call, but hey, you did it next to somebody you really enjoy spending time with. That stuff matters. And I think for your students now, it's tough. They've got hours of school. They have their homework. Maybe they're on the soccer team or the cross country team, and maybe they go to church or synagogue on the weekends. And
Right.
they've got a pretty structured life, so there's not a whole lot of downtime
Packed
outside of that.
schedule. Sure.
Yeah, so I think finding the joy within those activities is super important. And I think I've learned to take that with me, which is, you know, so going to X meeting might not be the most fun thing, but as we walk there, let me ask this person, where they're from and get to know them better, and making it maybe 1% more enjoyable. That's a win for me.
The one thing that you just brought to mind is I love looking at your social because, dude, you are so incredible to the people in your life. You're constantly wishing people well. You're constantly wishing people happy birthday. And I love that. I don't see enough of that on Instagram where someone is just constantly throwing out to the love to all the people they've worked with today, yesterday, 10 years ago, yes, like tomorrow. Like you're always doing something so amazing. Happy birthday to so and so. Oh, I missed the trips to this and that. And it just warms my heart to see that because it just shows me what a wonderful man this young man has turned into and how important it is to tell people that you care about them, and you do it. And I love that. That is like my favorite Ian thing to see how much love that you put out on social. Never the hate, never the mean, always propping people up, giving them their due. Even people that we don't know that are behind the scenes doing all these presidential things. And you're like, oh, it's so and so's birthday. Wish him a hat. And it's like, you're just so full of life and energy and fun. And that is such an amazing quality to have for anyone. It doesn't matter what age, but you have just matured and grown into this wonderful person. You're constantly giving shout outs to people. And it is amazing to see. And I just had to throw that in there because every time I see it, you're always throwing something positive out there. And I love that about you. I think it's amazing.
Oh, and I really appreciate it. Working, for Joe Biden has taught me, I don't know, so many things. I can't even begin to articulate all of them. But the one biggest takeaway every day, you know, traveling the world with Joe Biden, seeing him interact with military families and other world leaders and children and, his cabinet, members of Congress, people that disagreed with them, people who didn't vote for him.
Right.
I'll never forget his approach to um, life, but also the sentiment he would always leave people with was something his grandmother told him, which was, his grandmother would always tell him, don't just keep the faith, Joey, spread it. And I think spreading the faith, and not even in a religious connotation,
Oh,
but
no,
spreading
no.
the joy and spreading the
Yeah.
wealth and spreading positivity is just so important. And I think we can all, first of all, we can all always do better at that. So just that reminder of trying to do that is so inordinately important.
That's
And
awesome.
it's something that getting to see President Biden do every day was the single greatest honor of my life. But trying to live by that, I think, is also incredibly important too.
and literally having a front row seat because like I've never been to the Oval Office and you've been there like probably countless numbers of times. Like was that like a really overwhelming experience the first time you went in there? Because as a history teacher, I don't know how I would control myself being in there.
Yeah, I mean, it working in the White House never gets comfortable. You never get used to it because, the first time I was in the Oval Office, was also the first time I was, setting up a major event in the Oval Office where there was lighting and press and things like that. So there's no real time for training wheels. There's no real time to take in the
Right.
moment.
Just jump
You're just
right
like, all
in.
right, you're in go mode. And then I'm like, hey, can we move this over an inch? And it's kind of in the way. And some White House usher is going to ask the White House electrician or the historian, and
Right.
they're like, "Oh, that bust of Lincoln or whatever it is. Yeah, we can do that, but this person has to do it." And you're like, "Wow, did I just really ask to do that?" And I'll never forget. Here's that little insider baseball. That when President Biden gave his first Oval Office address, um, I'll never forget. We were setting up and all the equipment with the networks and getting ready, and I was looking through the lens and something just wasn't right. It was off center and I measured the cameras were centered. Something was wrong. And I looked down and I looked at my boss, Ryan, and I finally figured it out. And the Resolute desk was like, it was off center by a couple inches. And you think
Oh
about
my
it, you're like,
God.
how could that
How could
happen?
that be? How did you miss
But
that?
you think about it every 4 years when these president transitions happen, they
And
have like
things move
three
around.
hours to set up the place.
Right.
They're moving as fast as they can, and no one's actually
Right.
measuring
No,
with a
just put it there.
tape measure.
Next.
And they're not really measuring for broadcast. So here I am, like, guys, we got to move this thing over 2 inches, and everyone looked at me like, did this guy just ask to move the Resolute desk with timbers from the HMS Resolute? He survived so many ministries. He wants to move it, and I was like, yeah, it's not centered. And what did we do? We moved it. Everyone looked at me like I was crazy, and the shot was centered, and we got along with the address. And I definitely did not mention that to the president, and we just kind of moved on.
Went
But
on.
so yeah, you ever get used to it? No. But is it remarkable and such an incredible honor? Yes. And
Wow.
stories like that, even telling them, they sound fake, but I'm like, yeah, that happened, and
That's
just being a part of
incredible.
history it's just remarkable.
And I'm sure you have like dozens and dozens and dozens of those kind of anecdotes. So I was wondering, with all of this work that you did in the White House, did you ever have an inkling to write a book about it? Is that something that interests you in the future? Is that something you might want to do?
There's a lot of folks who like to opine about their time in the White House or you know their experiences, and I think for some people it makes sense. I think for me, especially because the nature of my role was so principle facing and inherently very private that I think a lot of those stories would be harder to share. Now there are a lot like that what I just told you that are relatively innocuous and that I can share
Right,
that are
right, right,
interesting
right.
and funny and show a different kind of behind the scenes lens. So maybe one day that could be in my future. I think for now, just getting to talk about them in forms like this with the people that helped me get there, I think are more along the lines of what I'm more comfortable with. But who knows?
Yeah, yeah.
Maybe one day we'll see.
Okay. Because this is an avenue that most people don't ever get to explore in their lifetime, and you've done it for a long time. And that's the other thing that many of us don't understand the ins and outs, the legalities, what you can, what you can't talk about. So that's another thing that you're helping people to understand that there's a lot of, you can't talk about these things. There's, what's the paper they make you sign where you can't talk about things?
Sure, like non-disclosures and this and that, and
Non-disclosure. Right, right, right. And that happens because this is America and it's privacy. We don't want the world to find out about these things. And yeah, no, I guess I should have been more specific. Like the anecdotal stories, I think would just be amazing because you just have so many dealing with uh, a sitting president, dealing with someone running for president, being the ice cream man, as you were referred to in someone's book, things along that line. And those stories are just go so long because then you get to see people in their behind the camera, behind the scenes. You're not seeing them as this person on TV. They're running for a political office title, and you really got to see them as people, which I think most of us don't get to see. You just see the person on the screen, whereas the camera goes off, and all of a sudden, what you saw is not the person that Ian gets to hang out with for the next amount of hours that they work with them.
That is true. No, and no, it's definitely something I thought about, and it's very interesting. But just living it was such a remarkable experience. I think, to be honest, too, it's recent. I'm still processing. Like,
Yeah. Oh, yeah,
wow,
for
like
sure.
briefing world leaders, and traveling, flying on Air Force One, briefing the president on Air Force One. It's like, did that really happen? So
Wow.
maybe one day. But for now,
Just
just
something to think
really
about.
grateful for the
Sure.
opportunity. Yeah, something to think about. Just excited for all the incredible connections that I made and continue to make.
Now, you've gone over this a bunch of times throughout the podcast, but I just want to ask this specific question. Was there anything that you learned from Don Estridge from being there for 3 years that high school didn't show you? And then you got to high school and you were like, oh my God, I learned that at the Don.
But there's so many things that come to mind. But I think maybe the thing that we haven't talked about yet, or no, we have, maybe not as explicitly, is you know when I went to Down Estridge, we talked about this a little bit. It was the shiny new object. It was this cool technology program, and people were, doing anything they could to get into the school and to be able to go there. And coming from Boca Raton and coming from South Florida, I think it was the first time I met and interacted with students that maybe looked different than I did, or students that
Yes.
came from a different place than I did, or
Right.
maybe had different religion than I had, or had
Right.
different, too young for political beliefs, but different way of life. And I think understanding that there's the differences that we talk about are actually what make us, so much more culturally rich and immersive, and are so important to our educational journey, and learning from each other's differences. I think that was something that maybe I didn't explicitly understand at the time, but being introduced to folks with different interests and talking to them and making friends that maybe you didn't have much in common with, but you met them in Mr. Proper's class.
There you go.
I think that's such an important part of sort of the educational journey that really does prepare you for, because it never stops getting bigger from middle school, right? We've talked about that. Like,
Right.
and
Right.
in eighth grade, you're the big fish in the little pond, but then you show up to maybe Boca High, where there's 2,600 students, and
And it flips.
yeah, and then our college there's thousands, or then you go to
Yes.
the federal government and there's millions of people. And
Millions.
how do you make friends, and how do you make colleagues,
Traverse
and,
that.
and, and find
Yeah.
connections? Yeah, how do you
Yeah.
navigate that? So I think that's something that I wish I would have understood better at the time, but definitely, certainly was a huge part of Don Estridge, which is how to interact with folks that maybe you don't have much in common with. But
Right.
that's not a deterrent to not
No,
interact with them. That's even more of the reason
to
to
do it.
engage with them and to learn from
Right.
them.
I've had that question asked to me many, many times. Mr. Proper, why do you work here? And I'm like, what do you mean? They're like, well, this place is so different. I go, it's not for me. I go, this is basically where I grew up. They're like, you didn't grow up in South Florida. I said, no, I grew up in this kind of environment where you go to school and you're meeting everyone basically from around the world. I grew up 10 minutes from New York City. So, like, I think when I went to college, I finally met someone from a country I'd never met someone from, and it was Bangladesh. I've met so many
Wow.
people because I live next to the biggest metropolitan city in the world, and everyone's there. So when I came to Don Estridge, I'm kind of like, well, this is the same thing. And I've had so many kids go, hey, Mr. Proper, how come you interact with my friends who are absolutely nothing like you? And I go, because they talk to me. And they're like, but you talk to anyone. I go, no, 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 no. I'll talk to anyone. It doesn't mean that they'll talk back to me. They'll interact with me, because a lot of kids don't want to interact with teachers that they don't have because they don't know them very well. And these kids will just come up and talk to me. Like you said, I'm the tall, redheaded dude in the hallway wearing the New Jersey Devils jersey and high fiving kids because it's middle school. It's supposed to be fun. It's eighth grade. It's the last bastion of fun. And I want them to leave and enjoy it. And that's the mark I want to leave there. And hopefully I have. And according to you, I did, because here's Ian talking about it all these years later. Oh man, we have talked about a whole bunch. You have really gone all over the place, and I'm so grateful. So I end these podcasts the exact same way every time, since all of my students have gone to Don Estridge. I just want to know: do you remember who Don Estridge was as a person and/or what he did?
It's funny. I definitely didn't, until I left Boca. But when I started traveling more, and when I worked at the White House, there was a huge reinvestment rather, into artificial intelligence and technology and computer chips. And you may remember that Chips and Science Act, a huge
Yes,
cornerstone of, of the
gigantic.
previous administration for President Biden. And I'll never forget, traveling to Poughkeepsie, New York, and working with iconic American companies like IBM.
IBM.
And, I'll never forget, there was, when we went to Poughkeepsie to IBM, they had a little museum there of all these old artifacts and the first personal computer, the first typewriter, all these different, IBM, I
Wow.
think until recently had, and I still have this record. I don't know, don't quote me on it, but they had the most patents, or for a long time, they held the record for the
Yes.
most patents by any US company. And
Yes,
one
they
of
did.
those, of course, being the first personal computer. And Don Estridge was this guy who led this team that made the first PC, personal computer, and it was in Boca Raton on this technology, this research campus that would later, ironically be a high tech middle school so many years later. And what's remarkable about the story of Don Estridge is it's not just that he was a smart guy, but he was so innovative, and he worked with outside groups and outside researchers and vendors to be able to really bring in this cutting edge technology, that was at the time cutting edge for PCs and in the industry. And, I think about IBM as a company now, and, the CEO is an immigrant from India, a brilliant guy named Arvind Krishna, who he also worked his way up. He was a researcher just like Don Estridge was, and he went from researcher to now the CEO,
That's
30
incredible.
years later, of IBM, a massive American company. And, you think about Don Estridge, and his story. Obviously, I don't know if all of your students know, but Don Estridge's story tragically ended in a plane crash on a Delta flight, back when flights had to take technical stops to refuel.
Right.
I think at Dallas Fort Worth, but who knows how his story would have ended. But he was such an amazing researcher, and I think about the campus of Don Estridge, the school now, and such a symbol of a hub for education, but also innovation. And who knows? Just if you keep showing up and putting in the time and the research. So what an honor for someone like you to spend almost 3 decades, how many years, working at that school, and being able to teach so many students who innovate every single day. But
It's
we're
incredible.
a remarkable place for Boca Raton, but also for the county.
That is definitely one of the best answers I've ever gotten from that question. So you must get the applause. Finally get to use that. That was incredible answer. And you are very well versed, even more so than most people. Most people do the PC thing and that it was invented there. I've never heard anyone yet say that they went to Poughkeepsie and they saw the museum and they did all that stuff. That's incredible. That's so incredible. But we
Now,
see
if you
what
asked me about computers and how to make a computer, I would have absolutely zero idea compared to the cool STEM
me
students you
too.
interview. But I know the history. That's about it.
And that's the same thing. I'm a history teacher and I love to know the history of every little thing because there's history of everything. I literally pick up a stool in class and go, how did this start? As a tree. Well, yes. And then eventually it turned into what you see today. It's obviously a boring practice to you and you don't care, but I'm sure there's someone out there that wants to make a better mousetrap, make a better stool. So that's so amazing that you got to see this. Now, why were you there? It was just a conference? Like, what was your reasoning for being there? If you don't mind me
No,
prying.
actually, no, no, not at all. President Biden actually went to highlight some of the new investments, in technology and
Ah,
infrastructure, and creating some of these chips. So we were there for, it was a work trip, and
okay.
I'm looking at some of their cool artifacts. I'm thinking, wow, what an amazing sort of personal point of privilege.
It's full
Remembering that
circle.
some of these
It's
things
full.
were invented in Boca. How full
Yeah,
circle is that? How cool is that?
it's full circle for you. Now, this is the last question for this. Did you reveal that to anyone? Did you go, "Hey, I went to the middle school named after this guy." Like, did you reveal any of that, or was that just something inside you were like, "Oh, this is so cool"?
It was. We were getting a tour of the facility by one of the executives, so it didn't really feel like the right time, but it was definitely a moment of silent personal pride of how cool that
Nice.
is. Full circle sort of, plot lines converging on one. But no, very, very proud. And I wish, um, you know, I, I hope your students understand not just the namesake, but just how lucky they are to be able to show up every day and not be judged for what they know or don't know, and be able to just try their best at becoming better young people, young men and women, and being a part of such a community that now is so robust and has alumni, 10, 20 years down the line who are out in the world doing things that they might be interested now, or maybe they don't even know that that's something they're interested in that they will be later. And people like you who are giving them this insight, this platform to be able to potentially connect with folks that are in a field of interest to them, or who knows, maybe listening to these things sparks that interest for someone that says, you know what, maybe I want to go to DC and get a tour of the White House one day, or maybe I want to go to, New York and see what they're doing at IBM. This podcast and your classroom, and you live that every day for these young folks. And I hope they understand. If I have one wish for them, it's I hope they know how lucky they are to have that opportunity.
You are so kind. And that's actually the reason why I do it, because I didn't do these things. I mean, I've been to the White House. I've never had the White House experience even remotely close to yours. So that's why I do these things. So everyone can hear these stories. Because, with, like you said, with Instagram and Snapchat, everyone's just showing the amazing things that they do. No one's like, oh, I broke my leg in a mountain biking accident. Like, no one's showing you that. And it's nice to know how, literally, like it's called, how I got here. This is what Ian did. This is his journey. He started with me, moved forward, kept moving forward, kept pushing the ball further, further, further. But he said it perfectly. He never gave up. He has this stick-to-itiveness. He has the work ethic. That's what you need. Without those two ingredients, who knows how successful this man would have become? Because you need to work hard. You need to find out whatever it is. And again, did he know that this was the career path he was going to do in 8th grade in Mr. Proper social studies class? No, he said it time after time, but he figured it out. He kept moving forward, kept pushing that ball a little further, a little further, a little further. And one day he woke up in the White House moving the presidential desk. Like, how many people have had that opportunity? I mean, come on. So these stories are just so incredible and motivating. And again, you don't necessarily have to use it to get to the White House, but get to whatever your personal White House is. It could be something different. It could be engineering. It could be mechanical drawing. It could be sports. It could be, we've had everything at the Don. We even have professional athletes that are there now. We have a professional basketball player who plays for the Minnesota Timberwolves, Josh Minot. Anything is possible. And these people are here to tell you how to make that possibility a reality. So thank you, Ian, for coming on and telling your story. It's so amazing. And again, the compliments, I am beyond words. Thank you so much. And I really appreciate all of your time.
It's such a pleasure. It's so good to catch up. And no, just thanks for having me on. And I hope I get to see you soon in person and we can catch up.
Excellent. I do too. Thank you for listening to How I Got Here podcast with Mr. Proper. Music provided by Miss Mata. Thank you to Patty Fernandez for the introduction. Thank you to Seth Proper for logistics and behind-the-scenes production. Join us next time for another episode of How I Got Here and more stories of former students and their journey.